Greetings, fellow tarot travelers, tripping through the tetrahedral triptych of the cards I shall lay before you. I'm Tarot Torch, and today we're going to talk about the yellow vests. Now, I already did a video on the yellow vests, and I suggest you watch that first in order to get a definition of terms and an understanding of who the yellow vests are. But if you know all that, welcome to this video as well. The cards we're going to use are called the Tarot de Marseille Edition Millennium. They're the Millennium Edition Tarot de Marseille. It's a very modern deck that was recently released that does everything correct with the proportions and the angles, and the entire card fits the characters rather than going beyond the boundaries of the card. I like this deck. It's a great deck, and because it's a modern issue with the yellow vests, I want to use a modern deck to reflect that. So, going into the 13th week of increasingly violent riots in Paris, with political and socialists of the protesters growing, will the French Republic survive? More than 400 protesters were arrested last weekend, with increased graffiti on national monuments, with multiple fires set throughout Paris, and with the brutality and violence from the police and towards the police escalating. Mobs are now looting. The far right, the far left, and the disenfranchised are all uniting on the streets. There's a strong Muslim contingency as well as a white racist contingency, all uniting to attack the government. The Paris establishment claims that professional protesters and violent criminals are hijacking a legitimate movement, as water cannons are now being deployed, with protesters being blasted with high-pressure water from as many as 7 cannons at once. The French government, meanwhile, has passed very restrictive laws concerning public assembly, even though it already demands permits for all public gatherings in public places. The protesters all claim that they are simply people who cannot afford to pay their bills, pay rent, and eat any longer. These protests are spreading throughout France, especially in Marseille, Strasbourg, House, Bourges, Reims, and internationally in Belgium and even into England. The political analysis is clear. Macron did not get elected due to his political platform. Rather, his election was a rejection of Marine Le Pen, whose extreme right-wing party was his adversary during the last election in the second round of voting. Macron may have the government, but he does not have the will of the people, which destabilizes his legitimacy. One of the first actions of Macron, once elected, was to eradicate the wealth tax on the richest 1% of France's society, which is viewed as an insult to the struggling French middle class. So what did Macron do to solve the problem? He wants to open a public debate, not unlike the American town hall meetings televised during the Clinton years. There is much skepticism about this. Will these yellow vest type protests arrive in America? Is this a global movement? Is the world tired of an uber-rich political caste of corrupt, thieving liars who have absconded with the governments of the world? Will more groups join the Paris protests, like the ambulance drivers and high school students, so that numbers grow? Will this movement fizzle out? Will the government be overthrown? Will the government lower heating prices, gas prices, taxes, education, and fix the economy? Well, these are a bunch of unknown questions, and when we have unknowable questions with unknowable answers, we turn to the tarot cards, because even if they don't speak directly to our topic, they will speak and tell us something about it. And so here we are. I'll just give them a brief shuffle because they already are pre-shuffled, and give them a little cut right here. And let's hope for the best. We want the right cards to emerge to explain to us the situation with the yellow vest protests and where this is all leading. And the first card is the Two of Swords. Now the Two of Swords represents boundaries. It's a card of limitation. As you can see, there's a beautiful flower growing in the middle of two swords. It has to know its boundaries and its limits. There's a limits to growth for all things on earth, even social protests, and even Macron's term as president. The next card is the Ace of Wands. Well, the Ace of Wands is actually a torch, and it represents, among other things, revolution. The Ace of Wands is a fiery, empowered card that it could easily be a protest sign. And it could also pass legislation through a government. It's a very powerful sign that causes expediency. The next card is the Ten of Coins. And the Ten of Coins represents great abundance and wealth. It can mean cash, but it can mean art, lands, holdings of all sorts. And it's usually intergenerational money. Money that is so profound it goes to children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and even beyond. So when we look at these three cards, in terms of the Yellow Vest movement, there's a limit to what they can do. The government is watching and is going to pass more restrictive laws and is going to arrest more people. And the intergenerational wealth of France is at stake. Are we going to see all the beautiful architecture, all the beautiful fountains, all the beautiful plazas? Are we going to see all these things destroyed and defaced? You know, Paris is considered one of the most beautiful cities on earth. I've been fortunate enough to visit it on 5 different occasions in my life. And I will tell you, it is simply gorgeous. What a city, with the Tuileries in the center of Paris, this beautiful garden that goes on for so long, for miles. So we're talking about a legacy here of the most beautiful city, one of the most beautiful countries that speaks one of the most beautiful languages. And it seems to me that the government is not going to let this be destroyed. See, the hand is coming from the direction of the great wealth. The torch is being presented to the great limitation. My guess is that the French government, coming from great wealth, is going to present to the protesters who have a limited protest area given permits, and in their frustration who are burning cars on the streets, that they will present to the protesters some kind of torch, some kind of law, some kind of reform act, some kind of speaking engagement through the debates. But the Ace of Wands is more than just a speaking engagement. It deals with legislation. It deals with hard facts. Look, Paris is going to be destroyed. They'll burn the whole city down if they have to. This is like Bastille Day. The French consider this their liberation from oppression. They're thinking of forming a whole new constitution and government. And so the great wealth of France and Europe does not want this. They will be presenting something to the Yellow Vests. So the key card here is the middle one. Let's see precisely what they will be presenting. Up, the Sun card. Now the Sun card is a very interesting card. It represents all that is good. They'll make any promise that the Yellow Vests want to hear. They'll promise them the sun, the light in the sky. They'll offer them anything and everything. Just stop hurting our statues. And then when we look at one more card, we see, because I want to get into a more realistic picture and dynamic, we see that the card here is the Four of Wands. Now, the Four of Wands is a very, very interesting card. It means so many different things, but I think in this application, it would represent that there is a force behind the will of the government. In this particular case, they'll be promising everything the Yellow Vests want, but if the Yellow Vests don't take it, there's always prison, and worse. So I think we got like a heaven and hell situation here. And what is going to occur is legal reform. And, you know, not everything that shimmers is gold. And while they promise them the star in the sky, the reality may not be that. The reality may be different than that. And so we need to consider here an ongoing struggle that goes through the courts, that goes through the government, and may go through to the next election cycles. This may not be resolvable in just one government cycle. The cards do speak of the government having the upper hand, most clearly. But there is something good about these protests. There's something good going to happen. There will be some fundamental changes of government. And one step, 2 steps, 3 steps, anything towards the correct direction should be a welcome sight. It really comes down to if the yellow vests will stay in their boundaries and not destroy the most beautiful city and the most beautiful country on earth.